I don't want to put the kind of university, public, major, national, international research university, is the focus. But it's not the only focus of what higher education should be doing. And the first thing I'd say then about that particular topic is there is a sense that American universities in their soul are resistant to change. And somehow that's the issue. Well, let me say, every large and especially governmental institutions with bureaucracies absolutely has a certain inertia to change. Right? We see that in every institution, and universities are no different. But I can assure you there's nothing in the DNA of American universities that is resistant to change. I would say just to the contrary, they are committed to change. And if you look at the history, which I think is interesting in and of itself, but on the idea of change in American universities, the idea of a university and the soul of a university goes back even to ancient times. We had, I mentioned Plato and Socrates, the academy in Athens, which Plato invented, brought people to learn through a particular methodology, trying to produce better educated people dedicated to a particular, that is, philosophic tradition. Wasn't quite what a modern university is, but it certainly was adult education, high-level education. And in every culture, you have institutions like that. The ashrams in the Vedic culture are like that. We start to see the beginnings of what we call the modern university back in the 12th century. At least in Europe, we start to see it in the 12th century. And it was, in a sense, an efficiency notion. You had people who were wealthy having tutors, scholars, come in and teach their children, or being hired to teach the person, him or herself, himself, certainly in the 12th century. Well, if they came together in a town and the students came to them, there was certain efficiencies. They can teach more students. It really was a productivity gain. And so we start to see in Italy and then throughout Europe, universities start to form. And then they grow into the great Oxford, Cambridge, and we see that model. In America, when we see the first universities and what was at their soul, Harvard, Yale, they were really designed in their output, and therefore in judging whether they were doing a productive job, the soul of that type of university, which starts to look like a modern American university, was to take people who had been educated in reading and writing and some mathematics and other topics and give them theological education. That really was the goal. And they did a good job of that for a very small part of the population. Wealthy Anglo males. But that was what the American university started out like. When the sort of Jeffersonian notion of more religious plurality and freedom, universities started substituting what we might call the humanities and the basic sciences for that, And so it was a place that people who were going to be leaders in the community, again, wealthy white males, would go to what might, I don't mean to be glib, but be a finishing school, a cultural icing on the cake, so one could live a rich, productive life. It was in the late 19th century that German universities started actually doing what today we would call collective science. The early phases of the think tank, that research or scholarly output was a role for those universities. And that really is what the 20th century in America inherited, and then at public universities, early at places like Berkeley and very early at places like the University of Texas, started seeing that research output. That's a major change, over a long period of time, but a major reform of American universities. And then the big reform in the latter part of the 20th century is to open up those opportunities, the educational opportunities, to a wider group of the population, to women, to first-generation students, to minority students, to low-income students. And from about 1950 on, there has been a dramatic change in the makeup of American universities based on that. And we're still going through that. And the mission has come to include workforce training at every level and education to a much wider group of our population. The point I want to make with this is change has been in the DNA of American universities from the beginning, and it will continue to be. The American University in 2025 will look very different. In 2050 will yet again look very different. So there will be major changes, just like there is in our technology, just like there is in all aspects of our life. So all of us in higher education need to be for change. In some ways, it doesn't matter whether we're for change. It's coming. The only question is, will we be directing it and dealing with it and managing it? Or will it overwhelm us? So on that, I think the debate about higher education throughout our country, there ought to be absolute agreement on that point. There will be change, and we all need to be engaged in directing it. Now, there are still issues of how that change ought to take place. The second point I want to make then goes to sort of where we are right now in the American university. And it is a very odd institution. Think about it for a moment. We take 18-year-olds who in almost any culture historically and in our culture today are mature and fully ready to go out into the productive workforce. And we sidetrack them to spend 4 years, unfortunately sometimes 5 or 6 years, a major issue that we're addressing on our campus. Because we do need to have our flow through and our productivity improved. But we take them and we let them lie fallow from a productive point of view so that they can study. And at American universities, they also have cultural and social interchange. Many of them have never met someone, or certainly had a dialogue with someone from another culture or another religion. That's part of this experience as well. But why would we do that? It seems so counterproductive. And we take some of our most productive 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds